Empires don't fall because of enemies. They fall because of betrayal from within. At the height of Salahuddin Ayyubi's rise, a hidden war had already begun inside Egypt. Not on battlefields, but in palaces and secret alliances. Powerful men, driven by greed and ambition, were working with foreign forces to tear their own state apart. And before long, even the Caliph was no longer in control. As this story unfolds, think about it for a moment. Was this kind of betrayal inevitable? Or could it have been stopped? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd really like to hear your perspective. And if you're drawn to powerful stories like this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Islamic Conquests. Iyarara had finally regained consciousness in Cairo. What she revealed in those moments would shake the foundations of power itself. At first, she spoke as if it had all been a dream, fragments of memory returning slowly, painfully. But as her mind cleared, the truth began to unfold. A truth far darker than anyone expected. She described how she had been used, manipulated, and controlled. A priest had violated her dignity repeatedly, using rituals and deception to break her will. She had been nothing more than a tool in a much larger design. When she was told how close she had come to death, that her execution had already been planned, that her head would have been severed, and her body thrown to crocodiles if the raid had not come in time, fear consumed her. This delicate, once proud young woman began to tremble uncontrollably. Tears streamed down her face as she kissed the hands of Sultan Salahuddin Ayyubi. She spoke with a broken voice. This was her punishment. She said, a consequence of her sins. But now, she wanted redemption. She begged for protection, not for comfort, but for a chance to atone. Her mental state was fragile. Yet, within that brokenness, she began to reveal who she really was. She claimed to be the daughter of a wealthy Muslim merchant from Sham, a man deeply connected with powerful elites. In that era, the so-called emirs were not always guardians of the people. Many had become rulers of small territories, operating under the larger authority of central governance. Yet over time, they had drifted into decadence. Luxury had replaced responsibility. Their courts were filled with music, dancers, and excess. They maintained close relationships with rich merchants, often engaging in trade and corruption. Bribery was common. Their private quarters overflowed with women, and discipline had long been abandoned. Iyarara had grown up in that world. From the age of 12, her father had taken her into gatherings of music and pleasure, exposing her to an environment where beauty was currency and modesty had no place. He saw her beauty not as something to protect, but as something to use. By 14, the emirs had begun to notice her. Gifts followed, attention followed, and slowly she became part of that world. Willingly at first, then completely. By 16, she had crossed a line she could never undo. Without her father's knowledge, she entered into a secret relationship with one of the emirs. Outwardly, she still lived at home, but in reality, she belonged to a different world now. A world of influence, manipulation, and control. Over the next few years, she became known for her beauty, her charm, and her ability to control powerful men. She knew how to speak, how to persuade, how to create desire and dependency. Eventually, even her father stopped resisting. He accepted her choices, perhaps because they brought wealth, status, and access. What seemed like personal corruption was only the surface. Because soon, something far more dangerous began. For the past 6 years, she had been trained, not in art, not in culture, but in strategy. A conspiracy had been forming. 3 powerful emirs, along with her own father, had become part of a hidden alliance. Their goal was not wealth alone, it was power. They dreamed of breaking the existing order, weakening the caliphate, and positioning themselves as independent rulers. But they could not do it alone, so they turned to the Crusaders. With their support, the plan began to grow. Foreign influence entered quietly, through agents, through money, through ideas. And Iyarara became one of their most valuable tools. She was used to create division between Nur ad-Din Zangi and the Caliphate, to spread mistrust, distort communication. And she was not alone. 3 Christian women were also brought into this mission, forming a network that operated beneath the surface of politics. Then came the turning point. When Salahuddin Ayyubi rose in Egypt, when his victories, his leadership, and his reforms began to reshape the region, the conspirators realized something. He was becoming too powerful, too stable, too dangerous to their ambitions. So a new mission was assigned. Iyarara was sent as a gift to the Fatimid Caliph al-Adid, but this was no gift. It was infiltration. Her task was precise: win the caliph's trust, control his thinking, and turn him against Salahuddin. At the same time, she was instructed to reconnect with the remnants of the Sudanese military faction that had previously rebelled. These elements were still present within the army, weakened but not eliminated. She was to bring them closer to the caliph and prepare them for another uprising. If possible, she was to push the caliph to support this rebellion with weapons, supplies, and authority. And if things went further, she was even to encourage division within Salahuddin's own forces. The ultimate goal: to create such chaos that Salahuddin would be forced to flee Egypt and disappear into irrelevance. It was a plan built on deception, timing, and internal collapse. And for a time, it worked. Iyarara admitted that she had gained complete influence over the caliph. She had shaped his thoughts, fueled his suspicions, and turned his heart against Salahuddin. Even Rajab, a key military figure, had been drawn into the conspiracy, and through him others. Step by step, positions of power were being reshaped. Loyal guards were replaced with those sympathetic to the Sudanese faction. The palace itself was changing, quietly, dangerously. Within just 2.5 months, Iyarara had risen to become the most influential woman in the palace, effectively the queen of the inner court. And then came the most dangerous revelation. The caliph, under this influence, had begun to consider something unthinkable. He wanted Salahuddin dead. Arrangements had already been set in motion. Rajab had coordinated with assassins. The plan was real. It was close. And yet, at that very moment, without knowing the full extent of this conspiracy, Salahuddin Ayyubi had already begun taking action against the caliph's weakening authority and corruption, almost as if history itself had shifted direction. And in a twist no one could have predicted, the very forces that Iyarara had hoped to use against Salahuddin ended up rescuing her instead. She now stood before him, not as an agent, but as a witness. A witness to a conspiracy that had reached into the highest levels of power. Salahuddin listened carefully, calmly. Every detail mattered, because what he had just uncovered was not a small betrayal. It was something much bigger, something already in motion, and far more dangerous than it appeared. But what no one realized yet was that this conspiracy was not finished, not even close, and the next move was already on its way. The next move came faster than anyone expected. Late in the night, before dawn had fully broken, Salahuddin Ayyubi was awakened with urgent news. His commanders had arrived, and what they reported confirmed his worst fears. A force of nearly 6,000 Sudanese fighters had crossed into Egyptian territory and set up camp not far from Cairo. This was no random movement. It was organized, intentional, and it was coming straight for the capital. But here is what changed everything. Salahuddin did not rush into open battle. He understood something most leaders ignored. When your enemy is larger, direct confrontation is not strength. It is a mistake. Instead, he chose patience and precision. He immediately ordered changes inside the palace. The caliph's guard was reduced to a minimal presence, while the rest were pulled back under his control. Authority was being quietly restructured, without noise, without panic. At the same time, he sent 100 carefully selected men, soldiers who could speak the Sudanese language fluently. Disguised as allies, they were sent deep into the enemy camp. Their mission was simple, but critical: blend in, spread misinformation, and observe everything. What they did next would shape the outcome of the entire conflict. They told the Sudanese forces that Salahuddin was preparing to leave Egypt for a campaign in Palestine, that Cairo would soon be vulnerable. The result? The enemy delayed their march. They waited. And that delay gave Salahuddin exactly what he needed: time. But what happened next changed everything. On the first night, as the enemy camp settled into rest, a sudden strike shattered their confidence. From a distance, fire rained down. Flaming projectiles tore into their food supplies. Within moments, their stored grain, their lifeline, was engulfed in flames. Horses panicked. Camels broke loose. Chaos spread before anyone could organize a defense. And just as suddenly as it began, it ended. The attackers disappeared into the darkness. No direct battle. No visible army. Just fear. By morning, hundreds were dead, crushed in panic, burned in the fire, or cut down in the confusion. Their supplies were gone, their formation shaken. But Salahuddin wasn't finished. The following night, it happened again. This time the Sudanese forces were alert. They had placed guards, expanded patrols, and chosen terrain they believed would protect them. But they had underestimated their enemy. Hidden archers struck from elevated ground, launching waves of flaming arrows. Once again, fire spread through their ranks. Once again, confusion took over. And before they could react, silence. The attackers were gone. No face to fight. No army to confront. Only uncertainty and fear. By now, the Sudanese commanders were desperate. They decided to change tactics. Instead of waiting, they would advance during daylight, locate the attackers, and eliminate them directly. But that decision was exactly what Salahuddin had been waiting for. The next day, he positioned his forces carefully. 400 infantry moved along the right, another 400 along the left, both at a distance, both advancing slowly. To the Sudanese, it looked like a flanking maneuver. So they reacted. They spread their forces outward, trying to protect their sides. And in that moment, their center weakened. Then it happened. From behind natural cover, 500 cavalry charged straight into the heart of their formation, where their command structure stood. The strike was sudden, violent, precise. Leaders fell, orders collapsed. And just like that, the entire army began to break. From both flanks, arrows rained down. Panic returned, but this time there was no recovery. A force of 1,300 had just shattered an army of 6,000, not through numbers, not through brute force, but through strategy, through control, or through understanding the enemy's mind. The battlefield was left covered in bodies. Some were captured. Some fled. Most never made it out. This was the second rebellion of the Sudanese forces, and this time Salahuddin chose not to forgive. The consequences were swift. Those who had led the conspiracy, regardless of rank, were imprisoned. Many were executed. Others were exiled. Even Rajab, once trusted, was sentenced to permanent imprisonment. For Salahuddin, this was no longer just rebellion. This was betrayal of the state. And betrayal demanded justice. But what surprised him the most was not the enemy. It was his own people. Among those involved were men he had once trusted. Men he believed were loyal. Men who had stood close to power, yet chose to side with destruction. And in that realization, something shifted. Salahuddin made a decision that would reshape the region. He removed the Fatimid Caliph, Al-Adid, from power. The weakened structure that had allowed corruption, manipulation, and foreign influence to grow was dismantled. In its place, Egypt was brought under the Abbasid Caliphate. Power was centralized. Control was restored. But the cost was heavy. Days turned into weeks, and Salahuddin found himself doing something he had never intended: passing judgment again and again and again. He once said with a heavy heart that it felt less like justice and more like bloodshed. Many of those punished were Muslims, and that burden weighed on him. But his closest companion, Al-Sudad, reminded him of something important. When truth reaches a person, and they still choose betrayal, their responsibility is greater. They knew, and they still turned away. Salahuddin listened, but the weight remained, because his purpose was never power. It was unity. He had not come to Egypt to rule for the sake of ruling. If anything, he would have given up the throne, if it meant he could continue his mission without obstruction. His vision was larger than each, is 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 larger than each. He wanted to unite the Muslim world, to strengthen it, to reclaim what had been lost, to push back the Crusaders, not just from the borders, but from influence itself. But what troubled him the most was something deeper. He could defeat armies. He could outmaneuver enemies. But how do you fight an enemy that lives inside your own society? Corruption, influence, moral decay. These were not battles fought with swords, and that was the danger he feared most. He warned that if internal weakness continued, Muslims would remain Muslim in name, and that would be the real defeat. Because in the end, Salahuddin understood something few leaders truly grasp. An empire does not fall when enemies attack it. It falls when its own people stop defending what it stands for. If this story made you reflect, take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe to Islamic Conquests for more powerful and thought-provoking stories from history.